My name is Manfred. I'm here today with Rajiv, and we're going to talk about building cloud-powered Android applications. So this is going to be very much a hands-on demo. We're actually going to take an application, write the backend for it like now, live in 15 minutes, and we're also going to give you a bit of introduction before we do that, and then we're going to talk about some of the future directions, and we'll try to leave a minute or two for questions and answers. So let's start with an overview. For this demo, we're going to be using Android Studio and Google Cloud Endpoints. And let me just give a quick overview of each of these. So Android Studio is an open source IDE. It's built for Android, and it's based on IntelliJ IDEA. Now, what that means is that it has a lot of good coding assistance tools to help you write quality Java code. So things like context-aware code completion and chained method auto-completion, optimizing imports, built-in spell checker, all of that kind of nice stuff. It also has a nice integrated visual and layout designer, which means that you can drag and drop visual elements into your app. And it also comes with a whole bunch of static code analysis tools. We call them linters. I think that's how they're known in the industry as well. And they help you to build quality apps, so they can check things like simple security issues and compatibility issues, all of that kind of things. And finally, Android Studio is very well integrated with Gradle build, which means that you can use the same build files and build setup for IDE, command line, your continuous integration server, all of these things. So that's one half. Now, the other half is Google Cloud Endpoints. And what Google Cloud Endpoints do is they provide a very simple way to build server-side logic for your apps on Google App Engine platform. And since it's running on App Engine, it's benefiting from all of these things that we just spoke about throughout the day. So auto-scaling, high availability, all of those nicenesses. So this is how a basic architecture looks like. You have a backend running on App Engine instances, and then you have Google Cloud Endpoints clients. And one thing that Endpoints does for you is they take the plumbing out of API programming by, for example, marshalling Java objects into JSON objects, providing REST APIs from your annotated Java code. Another thing that Google Cloud Endpoints does for you is they take the complexity out of multi-client development. So I understand that while you might be targeting Android as a primary kind of distribution source, there's also iOS and there's JavaScript. And so you can automatically generate strongly typed client libraries for those platforms. And then finally, endpoints also take the risk out of API development in the sense that there is out-of-the-box built-in denial of service protection. There is support for OAuth 2.0, and there's also support for things like client key management and so on. So anyway, when you combine these two things, you get something that's even better. And so in Android Studio, in my mind, Android Studio plus Cloud Endpoints is the easiest way for mobile developers to get to Google Cloud Platform. And we have a whole bunch of functionality in Android Studio which help you do just that. So you can create App Engine backends. You can generate strongly typed client libraries. There are also a bunch of quick fixes and as-you-type validations for when you're developing the actual API. And we're going to show you all of this during the demo in the next 15 minutes or so. And one thing I would just like to mention as well is that it's all using Gradle as a build system, so it's very well tied together and unified build across the command line, across IDE, for both the backend and the frontend. So let's jump into the demo. And we were thinking, like, you've seen a lot of cool demos today. We were thinking, what is something cool that we could show to you guys? And first, we wanted to show like our own application, just write something from scratch. But then we thought, is that necessary? And we found this. We found the To-Do.txt app, which is a simple to-do task management app. It's on Play Store. It's loved by Play Store users. And it's using a different cloud provider for the backend. So let me just show you the app. If we can just cut to the mobile device. This is the To-Do.txt app. As you can see, it does all of the things that you would expect from a to-do app. You can add a task, you can mark a task as done. Nothing groundbreaking, but it's a nice little app. Now, if we can cut back to the slides for one more second. Best of all, the app is open source. So we thought, let's take the app, let's remove the different cloud provider backend, and let's add our own cloud backend to it. So let's cut back to the device. This is exactly what we've done. So again, this is a to-do.txt app, but now instead of using a different cloud provider, it's using Google Cloud Platform. And so again, as you would expect, I can add a task. Sorry, I'm going to try to add a task during the demo, which hero demo. Sure, why not? Good enough. Yeah, so it works as expected. And let's get back to the slide, please. And in fact, it was so simple and so easy to do this transition from taking an existing app and adding a Google Cloud Platform backend to it that we're going to show you right now, live, again, submitting to demo gods how to do all of this kind of stuff. So we're going to start with an app which is completely stripped out of any kind of backend, just the UI. And then Rajiv is going to do all the magic, and he's going to add a backend to it. So over to you.
Cool. Thanks, Manfred. All right. So yeah, no pressure. Let's write a backend. All right. So here's just the architecture of what we're doing, because there's a lot of steps here. On the left side, you see the to-do text app, which Manfred showed, and as we dropped out the existing cloud provider. Right. On the right-hand side, you see the App Engine backend that we want to build here. It's going to use the Cloud Data Store to store and retrieve tasks. And what we're going to do is then expose this backend using cloud endpoints. And once we've exposed the backend using cloud endpoints, we can generate strongly typed client libraries and then use them over in the to-do text app. And then we can communicate with the backend to store and retrieve tasks. So OK, cool. All right, let's get started here. All right, so we're starting with the to-do text app. So what does that look like? All right, let me just go to Android Studio here. All right, I think you guys can see it. OK, so what I have on the left-hand side, you don't have to go through. You don't have to read all the lines here, but it's the to-do text project here, and there's a bunch of modules here. To-do text touch. There's like an action bar widget and whatnot. And what I'm showing here is the main build.gradle file actually for the to-do text touch module. So I'm not going to go through everything here, but as Manfred was saying, this is using the Gradle build system, and this is written in Groovy. So this is what the syntax is that you're seeing. And right here, I've actually got, one thing I'll point out is if you look at the compilation dependencies, there's a bunch of jars here, but then there's a couple of project dependencies, which are actually just pointing to the other modules there. So this is kind of a key point about using Android Studio. All of your Android applications use the Gradle build system and give you a much more rational way to build your app and do command line builds. So cool. OK, great. Let's go back here just to see where we're at now. And all right, so what I want to do now is I want to generate an App Engine backend that has a cloud endpoint service. So let's go and do that. So I'm going to go up here to Tools. I'm going to go to Google Cloud Tools. I'm going to say New App Engine module. The template I'm going to use is the App Engine Java Endpoints module. Let's call this To-Do Text Backend. And the package name could be com Google To-Do Text Backend. All right, that looks good. So I'm going to generate. All right, so a couple things going on here. One, we basically have a series of templates, and you're seeing that over here from the template code, we basically generated all this code here. And I'm going to go through that in a second. What's also going on is you're seeing that it says Gradle sync in progress. Because this is using the Gradle build system, anytime you add a module to your project, it has to be built and absorbed into the actual IDE via Gradle. So that's why synchronize was going on here. So if we're looking at the build Gradle file here for the Android application or the App Engine application, you can see that this is using the App Engine plugin. This is a Gradle plugin for App Engine. The dependencies are on the App Engine SDK. You've got some compile time dependencies here. That's the main Gradle file. So let's hop into the code that was actually generated, right? MyBean is, well, it's, I guess, MyBean. It's a pretty simple class with like a single field. It's just got a string field, as simple as you can get for a data object. Again, this is part of the template that we generate. And we've got myEndpoint here. OK, so myEndpoint's a little more interesting, because what this is it's actually it's a Java class, but we're exposing it as a cloud endpoint. how are we doing that? We're using the add API annotation, which you see up here, and I'm specifying a name of my API, which allows us to be exposed as a cloud endpoint with the API name my API. But that's not much fun. You need a method, right? I mean, you have to call something. You need some sort of RPC call. So there's the say hi method that's also been defined here. And we've exposed this with the API method annotation and we've given the name here say hi as well. And this is a really simple method. It takes a parameter, creates my bean, and returns it. So let's look at what this looks like, actually. Let's see what this actually does. So I'm going to run this. I'll hit play. OK. So whenever we actually run, an Android or an App Engine app in Android Studio, because it's using Gradle, it does a Gradle build beforehand. And then what it does is it kicks off the local development app server. You saw this in a previous demo, actually, and it's starting. It just kicked me over there. So it just started. But basically, this allows us to test locally before deploying to production. So let's take a look at what our sample app looks like here. So what I'm doing here is I'm basically opening up API Explorer. It's an app that's basically pointing to my local host here to slurp in the API meta information to provide me a view over the REST API. So you see that an API called myAPI has been defined. There's the say hi method. And it takes a parameter. It's a name. So I'm going to just put in Manfred. It's not my name. It's his name. But hit execute. And there we go. So what actually happened here, right? You see that the Java class I created with the annotations has mapped pretty well into a REST API. If you look at the post, just zoom in here a little bit, you've got my API in the name, version 1, that's the method, that's the data. The response is hi Manfred. So that's basically the API Explorer. That's just showing you how we're exposing a cloud endpoint really simply. So okay, let's go back over to Studio here. All right, let's stop the dev app server. And okay, let's checkpoint where we are here, right? So what we want to do is we've got the backend, we've got a cloud endpoint, that's great, but that's not really helpful for what we're trying to do here. We're trying to store tasks in a data store and get them back. So let's work on that part of the app. So I'll go back to Studio, and what I'm going to do is, so I'll start with this sample. It's good. I can get somewhere with this. It's called myBean. I don't like that name, so I'm going to actually rename this to taskbean. All right, that's better. Let me add an ID field here. I'm going to generate a getter and setter for this. Let me reformat the file, because that's a bit ugly. All right, cool. So now I have a bean with an ID field. All right. Now, OK, my endpoint. So this is where we actually want to put in the logic for what we're trying to do here. So I'm going to rename this to task API instead of my API. I'm going to drop out the say hi method, because we don't need that anymore. And I'm going to drop in some code here, and I'm going to and this is going to be code to talk to the data store, and it's going to expose 3 methods: clear tasks, get task, and store task. Right? Get task will retrieve tasks from the data store, store tasks will store a task in the data store, and clear tasks will delete all of them from the data store. But I'm going to drop in this code, and then I'm going to talk through what I did here. All right. So I've just dropped in a bunch of code, and I'm just going to resolve these imports here. I'm going to use the data store entity. Let's see. I want to use the App Engine fetch options. I want to use Java util list. Cool. I think I got them all. OK, great. Oh, there are actually a couple of other errors here. This one is actually complaining because task API, it starts with a capital letter here, but when you're using these REST APIs, you're supposed to start with lowercase letters. So I can just fix that. That's a validation that we wrote. And I look here at the get task method, and also I've got a dot in the name. It doesn't like that either. So I'm just going to fix that up. And just to let you know, when you're writing these endpoint classes, there's a lot of helpers for all these conventions. If you go under inspections here, you can see under Google Cloud Endpoints, you don't have to read them all, but there's a variety of things that'll help you with as-you-type validation as you write Cloud Endpoint classes. OK, great. So what did I actually do here? So I've created 3 methods. There's store task, as I mentioned to you, get tasks, and clear tasks. So to go through these really quickly, I'm using the data store service here. And what I'm doing in store tasks, I'm basically creating a new transaction. And then for a task bean that's coming in from basically a client, I'm creating an entity for that, and I'm putting it in the data store, and I'm committing that transaction. getTasks runs a query over the data store for all entities of type taskbean, creates taskbean objects from them, and returns them to the caller. ClearTasks is similar, except it creates a transaction, does that same query, and then it blows away all the tasks that are in the data store and commits the transaction. So, okay, cool. So, looks like we have our backend. So what we need to do now, I think, is actually, let's just see where we are, so I can keep track of where we are. Okay, cool. Yeah, what I want to do now is I want to generate client libraries, right? I've got my backend, I've exposed it through cloud endpoints, but someone's got to use it, right? And the thing that we want to use it is an Android app. So we need to generate strongly typed client libraries so that we can use this on the other side. So let me go ahead and do that, actually. So I'm going to go to Tools, Google Cloud Tools, and I'm going to pick Install Client Libraries. Okay, so this is doing a couple of things, right? What it's doing is it's doing a build of the App Engine app, because we've changed a bunch of the code, and it's going to then basically get all the meta information from the annotations, kick that up to a cloud service, which is going to take that meta information and say, oh, hi, you need Java. Here, I'm going to give you a bunch of Java source that you can use as a way to call the cloud endpoints from a client application. We grab that source, we compile it, and we install it into your local Maven repository. So now you can access it on the other side in the Android app. So let's go ahead and actually go and use those client libraries on the other side. So now I'm going to go to the To-Do Text Touch application here, and I'm going to drop in the dependencies here. Right? So I've added a reference to the libraries that were generated, and this is referencing the local Maven repo. And because I changed the build Gradle file, I've got to do a sync. So let's do that. And while that's going on, let's just see where we're at here. All right, so basically we're getting to the last stage here, right? We basically have our back end. We've got our client application. We're generating the client libraries. Now what we need to do is override the parts where we actually call the cloud provider, the existing cloud provider from To-Do Text app, and use ours instead, the backend we created. So let's go and do that. All right, cool. Okay, so the magic of this actually all happens in a class called TaskBagImpl. Not a great name, I know. It's a TaskBagImpl. But anyway, there's basically two methods here, or four methods actually: push to remote and pull from remote. And these methods actually are doing what they're saying. They're pushing the tasks to the remote cloud provider and pulling from the remote cloud provider. And you can see in this implementation here, it's using the remote client manager, which is for the existing cloud provider. So let's extend this class and override these methods. I'm going to create a new class here, TaskBagImpl. I'm going to extend TaskBagImpl. And I'm going to drop in code that overrides these methods and actually calls our backend instead of the existing backend here. So let's do that. All right, I'm just going to walk through the code quickly here. So what we've got here is basically an endpoints TaskBagImpl. I'm creating a new version or a new instance of Task API. And that's really the thing that calls over it's the thing that we use to actually invoke remote methods on our back end. You'll see in the construction, I've overridden the root URL to point to 10.0.2.2. That's because when I run this in the emulator, the Android emulator, I want to run against the local dev app server, which is mapped to 10.0.2.2. In push to remote, really, I'll just go through this really quickly, but we're basically grabbing the list of the tasks that are stored in the local Android store, creating taskbean objects, and then calling store tasks for each one of those. When we call execute, that's when the HTTP call happens to our back end. In pull from remote, we call getTasks, which is the name of the method we defined on that side, execute, and we call getItems, and then for each one of those, we create a new task object, which is what the UI understands for this app, and we call reload, and that shows them up in the Android application. So let's go ahead and just run this. Let's try this out, actually. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to run the backend locally. And while that's actually going on, I did remember there's one thing I do need to change here. I need to use the endpoints TaskBagImpl. So I'm going to change that here. Whoops. Cool. So it looks like the dev app server is running. That's great. And now while that's running, I want to run the client app. So I'm going to run that. That's going to cause a Gradle build to happen here. You can see that basically in the build process, it's actually going ahead and doing both the debug and release builds of the application. You get that by default. And you can actually define many other variants of your application very easily with the in Gradle. So I'm going to choose the running emulator here. All right, let's kick over to the emulator and see if we're working here. OK, cool. All right, so we're running the emulator here. So let me add a task. OK. Cool. Add another one. OK. I'll mark this as complete. And let's see what the actual, let's look at the back end and make sure we're actually storing data, and I'm not, not deceiving myself here. So I'm running the API Explorer. You notice the API definitions are now mapping to task API. I'm going to call get tasks here. And basically you see the data here. You see hi there, hi cloud platform people with the X. It's been marked as completed. That's why there's a line through it. So it looks like we're up and running there. Cool. So this is great. This is good times. But one thing we actually need to do is, well, hey, we need to get this to production, right? I mean, that was the whole point of the exercise. So let's go and let's do that. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to do a little housekeeping here so you can deploy this, all right? OAuth 2. I want to use OAuth 2 authentication. Want to make sure my app ID is set properly here. Cloud Platform Live 14. Great. And what I'm going to do is deploy this from the command line, because I mentioned we're using Gradle, so I should be able to do that, right? So let's do Gradle W. To do text backend, call app engine update, which uses the Cloud SDK under the hood. And all right, cool. So before doing this, it does a build. Looks like it's going up there. There's an updated SDK, so should grab that. Anyway, cool. So it looks like it's deployed. Let's go and all right, cool. Let's actually use the production backend on the phone there.
Yeah. Let's do that, Rajiv. All right. So let's see if I'm more lucky this time with my fancy tablet. So if we could cut to the device. Black screen. Hold on. Let's try one more time. Unplug, plug back in. That solves all the problems most of the time.
What,
unplug, plug back in.
Oh no, that's me.
So we try the phone one more time? Okay, if that doesn't work, let's use the tried and true method. Okay, still nothing. And
try one more.
And one more?
Yeah.
There we are.
All right.
Okay. So, Rajiv, what do you want me to add? So first of all, let me delete this. Let me delete this hero task, and then
just I don't know. Say
wrap up.
Yeah, wrap up. I like Rajiv. I don't know. Any of those things are fine.
All right, man. Okay, so I've tried adding a wrap up task.
All right.
And now if you go to developers console.
Cool. Can you flip over to the demo computer? All right, I'm going to refresh this here. There we go. Wrap up. Cool.
All right. This is a good time for applause.
Thank you.
All right. Thanks, man.
Sure,
so
man.
Seriously, I know this might not have been the most exciting demo of your lives, but this was no smokes and mirrors. In 15 minutes, we took this stripped out app and we added a cloud backend to it. So I thought it was kind of cool. And you've seen things like local dev app server and API Explorer and how code gets translated from Java to REST and all of those cool things. So anyway, if we can go back to the slides, I know you guys are eager to get to the fireside chat with Urs. and Jeff Dean, so I'll just quickly blast through these slides. I would just like to mention that while some of these things are really cool, what we have now, more of the exciting things are coming, including support for GCE and improved getting started experience, API analytics, third-party client access, and all of those kinds of things that you can look forward to in I/O in 2014. So I hope to see you all there. Thanks so much for coming. Thanks for being attentive after the lunch. I understand that that can be quite hard. And any questions? Yes. Actually, do we have a mic? Yeah, if not, you can just yell the question. I'll repeat that. Mm-hmm. Yeah, so that's a very good question. Let me just repeat it. The question was mostly, cloud developers are using other IDEs outside of Android Studio, and Android Studio is mostly Android. And so what's the further long-term plan there? So our goal is to meet you where you are. And so partially, one reason for that was having the Gradleified backend and frontend build. Currently, Android Studio supports just Java. There might be some things on the roadmap to extend that. Unfortunately, that's all I can give at this point. Yeah. Thank you.
Though one reason we did, we wanted to say the backends that we're creating there, especially in Android Studio, are really attuned to be used by Android apps, right? So that's why it's still in Android Studio. It's like just add a cloud backend very easily for the purpose of your Android app.
Mm-hmm. Okay, last question. Okay, the question was, will there be support from Android wearables and Google Glass?
I mean, yeah, we haven't thought about that, but technically, right? I mean, with cloud endpoints, if you're using, if it's a Java, you can generate bindings in any language, and you're using HTTP, right? So I don't see, we haven't thought about it, but I don't see any actual technical reason why that would be a problem.
Yeah.
To use an app or a cloud-based backend and cloud endpoints to expose it to a device like that.
Yeah. All right, thanks so much, guys. Thank you.
Thanks.